The effect of changing political and economic environments on international business. Australia first established an embassy in the People's Republic of China in 1973. Australia and China's relationship can be defined as a comprehensive strategic partnership, which is because China is Australia's largest trading partner, accounting for 33% of Australia's total exports. The value of the two-way trade relationship between Australia and China is totaled around $235 billion, 2019. The China-Australia Free Trade Agreement, or CHAFTA, was entered into force in December 2015, allowing 93% of Australian exports to China to be tariff-free. China is the fifth largest foreign investor in Australia, making up about 4.1% of Australia's foreign direct investment. Australia has also invested in China, mainly in the banking and wealth management services. Recently, the relationship between Australia and China has become more strained. China's general trade policy can be defined as belonging to a neo-mercantile school of thought. Neo-mercantilism, essentially, is when it involves government policy that encourages an excess of exports over imports, as well as control over internal movement of capital and centralization of currency decisions. Many view this as China's trade policy, as their trade is largely based upon increasing their exports, their manufactured goods, and increasing the control of capital movements. The Made in China 2025 is a national strategic plan implemented as part of their 13th five-year plan that seeks to grow China's ability to produce elaborately transformed manufactured goods, or ETMs, rather than continuing to act as the world factory, producing cheap, low-quality goods. Australia is the exemption to this rule, falling more into the absolute or comparative advantage, as although they do import Chinese goods, they do also they also export large quantities of iron ore, coal, and liquefied natural gas.
Recent actions by the Australian and Chinese governments have led to increased tensions in business and trade partnerships between the two countries. These actions of the Australian government include the introduction of a motion to establish an independent inquiry into the origins of COVID-19 to the World Health Assembly, Australia's submission to the UN that declared China's territorial and maritime claims in the South China Sea as having no legal basis, as well as the banning of Chinese company Huawei's 5G networks in Australia. In response, the CCP have imposed tariffs on Australian products, including an 80.5% tariff on Australian barley for the next 5 years, and an increase in tariffs on beef from 5% to 12% for at least 6 months. The Chinese government have also threatened to replace Australian iron ore imports, which account for 62% of China's total ore imports, with those from Brazil. Warnings have also been issued by the Chinese Ministry of Culture and Tourism to avoid travel to Australia following increased racist attacks on Chinese citizens in Australia. With recent developments regarding tariffs and recommendations advising against students and travellers coming to Australia, some of the country's largest export industries, including resources, education, and tourism, are at risk. Therefore, it is recommended that Australian businesses implement strategies to assist in mitigating these risks. These strategies include forming joint business ventures with local China-based businesses, engaging in exchange rate hedging, as if further tariffs were to be implemented, the Australian dollar may depreciate as a result of less demand for the currency. Additionally, businesses should diversify production locations and develop resilient supply chains to ensure their operations would not be crippled if relations with China were to break down further.
Here are a couple interpretations and quotes commenting on Australia's current business circumstances. First one is from the Minister of Trade, Simon Birmingham. Australia will not engage in cheap politicking over an issue as important as COVID-19. This reflects Australia's view that China's reaction is largely a political move. It is one to save face for the Chinese Communist Party, scaring potential penalties off. The second quote is from Kerry Stokes, an Australian businessman. If we're going to go into the biggest debt we've had in our life, then simultaneously poke our biggest provider of income in the eye, it's not necessarily the smartest thing you can do. This reflects the pragmatic view of a businessman, where relations with China are most important for growth, as 34% of Australian exports are purchased by China. This shows the approach of needing to improve relations with China in order to stabilise Australia's business environment for future growth. The final quote is from Australian political commentator Andrew Bolt. He states, "Many people have become blind to this menace. There are many people, particularly businessmen, who are running around with the idea China could make them rich. This view shows that the risks of appeasing China are too great, and the threat of Chinese expansion could have serious political implications to Australian sovereignty. This reflects the view that Australia needs to move away from Chinese reliance, making the Australian business system better off in the long term."